Now it's time for our panel of experts. Martin Powell is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Siemens USA, where he's responsible for driving corporate programs that will lead the company's achievement of global carbon neutrality by the year 2030. And if you don't know how big Siemens is, it is a big, whopping transnational sprawl. So this is a big commitment they've made. Suzanne Uthayakumar is the Global Sustainability Business Division Leader at Schneider Electric. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Schneider Electric in a moment. She leads efforts within the company to drive sustainability, efficiency, and resiliency. And I think she's gotten a lot of gold stars for that because Schneider's been winning all sorts of awards. Suzanne Fallender is the Director of Corporate Responsibility at Intel, where she works to integrate social responsibility into all aspects of Intel strategy. And Giana Amador, this is a four-person panel, is the co-founder and Managing Director of Carbon 180, an organization that's dedicated to building a world that removes more carbon than it emits. Let me start with Susan. Good to have all of you with us here. Let's go back and forth. Let's make this like the View with Whoopi Goldberg and others, and we can just kind of jump in when you like to. But let me start with Susan for a moment. Schneider Electric has been named the #1 in Corporate Knights ranking of the world's most sustainable corporations, which I didn't know that. So what are you doing that my friends at Siemens are not yet? We'll make it spicy.
Great start. So what we do is we drive sustainability within our own organization because we want to lead by example. Right. And we also work with our customers to reduce carbon in their operations. So within our own organization, we will be carbon zero emission by 2035, and we will be zero emission, including all our supply chain by 2050. So there are very specific programs that we have put into place in terms of driving green revenue, in terms of making sure that we work with suppliers that prioritize green in their operation, in working with our customers using our technology. For example, our EcoStruxure platform, we have a plan to remove by 2025 800 metric ton of carbon from the atmosphere.
Wow. I mean, I find that fascinating. I'm going to find out in a minute if Giana thinks if that's the right target, because she's been at this to kind of look at this, be the conscience of the conversation. Martin and Suzanne, I want to say that you both are in huge corporations as well. Martin, I was just joking about the Siemens. I mean, you're 5 years ahead on the zero carbon in 2030, but Siemens. Yep. So I caught that. But when you kind of look at it, part of what I want to get people to get an understanding of, and I don't want to lose them in this conversation, is sometimes we talk about tech and IT, in these big meta ways. But I'm interested in how you actually get the feedback and the loops and the systems involved. What sorts of platforms are we talking about? What kind of software leaps do we need? I know you work with PLM software, if I have it right, if I remember. But in the Siemens world, because you are so big and you look at these things, what are the key building blocks inside your company that help you get there?
Yeah, thanks for that. We're a huge company, as you say, but and our carbon neutral target by 2030 is driving us as a business to think hard about how we green our own buildings, but also, all of America's. And, some of the technology is very simple. It exists today, but the power of adding the technology with real-time data is the thing actually that's going to drive us to our Paris Agreement targets. Big solutions today like distributed energy, putting solar in the parking lot on roofs of buildings. We have to turn our buildings into mini power stations, and we have to do it quickly. Schools, hospitals, business parks, all can be done very simply. And you can connect all of those to data platforms that then allow you to manage and optimize the performance of those buildings. So I think there's some amazing opportunities coming pretty quickly.
Well, I find it fascinating. And just before I leave you, Martin, you used to be, as I understand, the deputy mayor of London. Do you find cities getting with it like London, or do you find them lagging?
Oh, I think cities have been ahead of the game for many years. I don't just say that because I worked in London government, but in the US, Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles has shown enormous leadership with the climate mayors. Over 400 cities pledged to stay into the Paris Agreement. He's also chair of C40 cities. A lot of huge progressive cities, Chicago, New York, Orlando, doing amazing things. I think, cities have the opportunity to listen to a lot of people complaining, and therefore they have to react to it pretty quickly. And this is why I do think cities will lead us out of this big challenge.
Suzanne, tell us how Intel is inside all of this. I know you probably get tired of that joke, but the old Intel inside. But tell us about the RISE strategy at Intel. And I just want to tell our viewers, who may not be as aware as I am of Intel, which is, the semiconductor world, the ability for so many elements of the tech world to work, to communicate, to have sensors. All of that is based upon technology that Intel pioneered and pushed forward. And so it is an interesting thing as we get, again, back to this question of the tech world helping to save the world. Where is Intel in the nexus of this?
Yeah, no, and thank you for having me here today. I think one of the things that Intel has been setting goals and focused on this for many years, but just as we've been talking about throughout this conversation, really our new 2030 RISE strategy that we announced is really to create a more responsible, inclusive, and sustainable world enabled through our technology and the expertise of our employees. And a big piece of this, and what's really different about, as we look out to the next decade, is really that focus on the enabling aspect of our technology. Intel's going through a massive business transformation with our strategy, moving into that data-centric world that we're all living in today, and really looking at all aspects of our business, how we can help enable not only transformation through our own operations, the global supply chain we engage with, but also through our data center group, through our Internet of Things group, our client computing group. How do we make sure we're enabling and collaborating differently with our customers in many ways? We've set out these big global challenges as part of our strategy, really to revolutionize health and safety through technology. We talked a lot about equity earlier, to really make technology fully inclusive, and also to advance, climate change action. And I think what we're seeing right now is what we've been talking about, that increased urgency, complexity, interconnectedness of all these issues. And I think for Intel, our aspiration, and our purpose is to create world-changing technology to enrich the lives of every person on Earth. So as we think about this, we think of how do we enable the sustainability of others.
Let me just say to the three of you before I go to Giana here, I hope I don't offend anyone in this, that if I were to do a conversation like this 10 years ago, which I did, I think there were some cases where people's, and companies' efforts were real, but I think there was also a lot of greenwashing. I think there was a lot of fig leaves. I have a friend in finance and environment, who told us at a dinner once, I'm a checked off box here. I'm not real yet in our company. I had him at a dinner recently. He says it's completely changed. We have now, risk models and, deep look at the costs and risks tied with violent weather and all sorts of other issues. And so there seems to be a change where we've gone from, I wouldn't call it fake, but less deep commitment to these issues to deeper. And so, Giana, you're the conscience of this conversation and working with Carbon 180. I don't know if you see it like I do, but do you feel as if the partnerships are in the right place, the technology is getting in the right place so that the goals we're talking about are more achievable and more real?
Absolutely. I think there's just a growing consensus that we need to act quickly and robustly on climate change. And so we're seeing private companies step up and make real commitments and take real steps to decarbonize their supply chains, or even sort of go a step further, like Susan mentioned, and make goals around removing carbon from the atmosphere. And also we're seeing governments want to enable the private sector, thinking about using their tools across the federal suite of research and development, incentives, and regulation to really drive that sort of dual-pronged change that is going to be necessary to meet our climate goals and really meet net zero by 2050, which is what the climate math tells us we need to do.
So you're positive, you feel optimistic about what you're hearing here?
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask, our three business people, and go back to Martin for a moment. We have a question from Zach Valdez, who's a fellow at NIST, at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Very, very important place. He says, how many cost-effective environmental change solutions via tech advancement are available now in America and are economically viable in developing countries as well. It's really looking at the developing country side. So, as we set up things in UK, the United States, the developed world, how much of this needs to and is penetrating other parts of the world that may not have the same cost infrastructure?
I mean, we're seeing these technologies, the ones I've talked about, being deployed all over the world. Finance is available. This is why it's so important that the US is back in the Paris Agreement, the powerhouse of the finance industry, the key technical people, the innovators are here. And, that can be exported, that can be put into all sorts of countries around the world. We're involved with the 100 Smart City projects in India. We're working all across China. So there's no limit on these technologies today. And I think, just going back to your data point, if you 10 years ago, we couldn't connect infrastructure systems in the way we can do today and extract the data from them and understand the business cases that work and the ones that fail. So our ability to succeed in these big infrastructure projects has improved. Our ability to finance them has improved. So I am optimistic about deploying these technologies beyond the US, the UK, and other places.
That's great, Susan. I'd love to get your take on this as well, but also, I think one of the questions, maybe this is an unfair one, what, as we look at the sort of horizon of what's developing in the tech world and what's coming in, do you see things we're going to be able to do and to calculate, to sense that we can't just quite do today? And I'll go to Susan and Suzanne. So we've got the camera on Suzanne, but I'll jump over to Susan in a minute. But Suzanne?
Yeah, no, I think one thing that I think is really the thing we can't do exactly today, but we're starting down this process, is looking at how do you modernize the grid, the electricity grid, and really enable it and redesign it so that it can use renewable energy in a meaningful way. So I think there's a lot of conversations, about that can be really helpful in driving that action forward. And we talked earlier about, using data, the enormous amount of data that's created today, and only a fraction of it is really being used in decision making. So one thing that, as we look at how do we collaborate and drive forward, or enable policy that really drives that incentive to do in different investments, I think it's about, we had launched a group called the Digital Climate Alliance, which is bringing IT companies together to talk to policymakers about how do we leverage that data and invest in systems so that we can have that real-time energy management and real-time information to make better decisions moving forward. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think going back to that piece of, is this real yet in companies? I think what I'm seeing is just this massive transformation in investors asking these questions of companies, in our finance teams getting involved across our companies, like you mentioned. And I think that integration to make it really part of the business decisions and not making these things separate, I think will help accelerate investments.
I remember many, many years ago talking to the iconic Andy Grove when I worked in the United States Senate in the 1990s, and he said this was going to become embedded, these kinds of environmental questions embedded everywhere. Intel was very water intensive. He says, we're going to fix that. There are a lot of things that Andy Grove told me back then, well before this discussion, made me take him more seriously, and then it made me, a tougher judge on other folks that I was hearing. But now, Susan, tell us, the same thing about how do you make it more real, and as you kind of look at what could technology help you do that you're not quite able to do today that you're optimistic about?
Absolutely. So to your comment on, how has the discussion evolved over the 10 years? I think technology and digitization has accelerated incredibly. And today you have connected products that measure how the operation is operating. And it gives us intelligence in terms of what decisions should we make differently. So how can we better use resources? How can we be more efficient, whether it's in our buildings or in our industrial processes, et cetera? Second thing is there is a significant movement in terms of holding investors and companies accountable for measurable action. So I'm sure all of you would have seen the call to action from Larry Fink of BlackRock. And he had pretty much, said that climate risk is a real risk, and it's something that we need to collectively address. So I think there's no longer an opportunity to just speak of what we want to do. And I do also want to say on record, in terms of Schneider's carbon ambition, not using carbon offsets, we will be emission-free from all our operations by 2030. Now, if we were to look at the offsets as well, we will be emission-free in 2025. So I couldn't let that go. I had to make that point.
That's cool. I mean, I really want this panel to keep going and have you guys back maybe quarterly to kind of see how things are going. But before I do that, John, I'm going to give you the last word. Can you tell us a little bit more about how an organization like Carbon 180 interacts with perhaps the government, the Biden administration coming in, also interacts with Schneider Electric, the Intels, the Siemens out there. How do you play the world of sort of aspiration setting in what you do, or shaming in what you do?
Both important tools. I think our goal at Carbon 180 is really to bring carbon removal solutions. So these are solutions that don't just reduce emissions, but actively remove carbon from the atmosphere from an interesting idea into a solution. And I think we know that the federal government has the capacity to help scale solutions, to bring down costs, to drive innovation. But really what they want to see, what policymakers want to see when we meet with them on the Hill, is that signal from the private sector that the innovations that they're putting forward, that they're investing in, will be taken up by the market. And so I think there's a really powerful play here to see these commitments from companies to, as Suzanne mentioned, bring together the sort of lobbying powers or the communication powers of companies to really drive federal action. And I think a really good example of this is the iPhone or smartphones. It wasn't something that was willed into existence by Apple in 2007. It's something that the federal government invested decades of research around GPS and satellites and the internet and touchscreens. And so I think we can really apply some of those technology innovation models to the world's, most difficult or most challenging problem, which I really think is climate change.
What a fascinating set of approaches. So thank you, Giana Amador, co-founder and managing director of Carbon 180, Suzanne Fallender, director of corporate responsibility at Intel, company I've known for a long time, of course, Susan Uthayakumar, Global Sustainability Business Division Leader at Schneider Electric. I'm going to go dig into Schneider Electric as you're winning all these awards on this, Susan, and thank you. And Martin Powell, Chief Sustainability Officer at Siemens USA, that just makes about everything. I've had a long relationship with Siemens, always fascinated to see what initiatives Siemens takes on. So thank you all very much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My final